Thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight here at the Dearborn Public Library and also online. We're very glad to be joining Mr. Dave Karger will be joining us tonight to talk about his new book, 50 Oscar Nights, Iconic Stars and Filmmakers on Their Career-Defining Wins. He's a graduate of Duke University. He's worked on many years at Entertainment Weekly, all over the media. He's a host, the red carpet host for the Academy on during the ceremony, and he's now an author. We're glad to be speaking with him tonight. So I want to first talk about the format tonight. We'll be talking with Dave about, say, like 40 minutes or so. And then we'll be taking questions, Q&A questions from both here in the room and online. Just want to throw in a couple announcements beforehand. We have an Oscar contest going where you can win a nice basket of candy and DVD copies of Barbie and Oppenheimer and 4 passes to local MJR theaters. You can visit our website to make your choices. And we also have other Oscar contest talks coming up on Thursday. We'll be at the 22nd. We'll be talking with Ed Zwick about his new memoir, Hits, Flops, and Other Illusions, My 40-something Years in Hollywood. On Wednesday, February 28th at 6:30, we'll be talking with Sam Wasson on his new book, The Path to Paradise, a Francis Ford Coppola story. And on Tuesday, March 5th at 6:30 p.m., we'll be talking with Scott Amon on his new book about Charlie Chaplin. So I want to thank you very much, Mr. Karger, for joining us tonight. Glad to hear the weather is not as rainy as it's been portrayed for you in Palm Springs.
That's right. And hello, and thank you so much. And I'm very happy to be part of this fantastic lineup of authors that you have. So I appreciate being here. Thank you.
So let's get right into it. Why did you write the book?
Well, I am a host on Turner Classic Movies. That's my main job these days. I've been doing that for the last 6 or 7 years. And TCM has an arrangement with a great book publisher called Running Press to publish about 3 or 4 Turner Classic Movies books per year about different facets of classic film. And I was approached by the people at TCM and Running Press 2 years ago. And they said, basically, now that you've been a host on the network for a while, would you be interested in writing a book for us? No guarantee that we'll accept the idea that you have, but if you have one, we'd like to hear it. And I've been approached over the years to do a book various times in my career, and it never just felt like the right time. And there was never a concept I could settle on that sounded appealing to me to do, that I thought people would actually want to read. But then 2 years ago, I started thinking about it more. The Oscars have always been the centerpiece of my professional life at Entertainment Weekly, writing about them, talking about them on the Today Show, which I've been doing for the last 24 years, and now on TCM. So I came up with this concept of 50 Oscar nights, the idea being I wanted to do a book about the Oscars, and there are many, and they're great. But I wanted to do one that came at the Oscars from more of a personal angle. So rather than about the horse race of it or the Hollywood studio politics of it, I wanted to do a book where I would get Oscar winners to tell me in a more emotional and intimate way what it's actually like to go through the experience of winning an Oscar and making an Oscar-winning project. So in the book, each of the 50 winners, I did new interviews with them, from actors and actresses to filmmakers to screenwriters to musicians and even some craftspeople. And each person gets a 4 to 6 page chapter, and it's in their words. I write a little introduction just to kind of tee the interview up, but it's really in their words to hear them talk about what it was like to make the movie, to go through the whole experience, to win, how they decided what to say, who to go with, what to wear in some cases, and what it means to them all of these years later. So it was a real joy to put this whole thing together. It was a lot of work, a lot of wrangling, but it was well worth it.
Well, yeah, I noticed in the acknowledgments of the book, it seemed like you would think it'd be a kind of easy thing to do, but but it wasn't.
Yeah, I mean, as some people may or may not be aware, when you're reaching out to this kind of caliber of person, and 40 out of the 50 people who are in this book are household names: Julia Roberts, Nicole Kidman, Elton John, Meryl Streep, Mel Brooks, Martin Scorsese. That was the point. I wanted people that everyone knew, and then about 10 people that are lesser known. But when you're trying to reach out to these are people who are inundated with requests all the time. So luckily, I did have two people that I am fortunate enough to know fairly well, Elton John and Nicole Kidman, and they both agreed to be in the book from the outset. So I had the fortune of being able to, in my pitch emails to all the other 48 people, to say, if you or your client were to participate in this book, they would be alongside the likes of Nicole Kidman and Elton John in the pages of this book, because that's all they ever want to know. Who else is participating? Who else is going to do it? And so that was a big a feather in my cap to have those two from the outset, and they were two of the greatest interviews in the book anyway.
Oh yeah, definitely. Did you have a wish list of people to talk to, or any kind of routine or anything, any algorithm, for lack of a better phrase?
I definitely had some guiding forces. So as I say, I work for Turner Classic Movies. So whenever possible, I wanted people who were from the 60s, 70s, and 80s. You know, anyone who was with us who won Oscars in those decades, I tried to get them. So I'm happy to say there's 6 people in the book who are 90 years of age or older. So Clint Eastwood is in there, Mel Brooks, Joel Grey, Lee Grant, Estelle Parsons, Rita Moreno, who won her Oscar over 60 years ago. So that was very important to me. Then I wanted parity of gender. So it's 25 male, 25 female. That was very important to me. And then also diversity was very important to me. I wanted LGBTQ plus representation. I wanted performers of color in there, because that has been a knock on the Oscars, that, you know, a lot of times the winners are not the most diverse. So I'm happy that 25% of the people in this book are either performers of color, artists of color, or LGBTQ plus people. So that was very, very important to me. And I definitely had an eye on that the whole process.
Did anybody turn you down?
Sure. Yes. As I said, I wanted as many of the classic era people as I could get, but I found out that unfortunately several of them just aren't doing interviews that much anymore. So Eva Marie Saint, I wasn't able to get her. Julie Andrews. And then I reached out to Barbara Streisand. She would have been a great get for this book, but she was writing her own book. She was writing her own book, so I wasn't able to get an interview with her. But I'm even impressed when I look at the people who did agree to speak to me for this book, because it's, you know, Julie Roberts and Meryl Streep, but then also great filmmakers like Spielberg and Scorsese and Francis Ford Coppola, and some great singers like John Legend and Elton John and Melissa Etheridge. So I'm just so grateful to the very impressive people that agreed to participate.
Who did you really enjoy talking to the most?
Oh my gosh, so many people. The one that comes to mind first would be Sally Field. I had interviewed her a couple of times, including at an event at the Academy Museum in Los Angeles, and I just really like her a lot. And we did the interview the day after Christmas. This was a year ago on Zoom, and she was just a delight. She was so much fun. She was so candid and willing to talk about all of the great aspects of winning her first Oscar for Norma Rae, but also some of the less great aspects. She was in a relationship with Burt Reynolds at the time. He was, let's say, not the most supportive boyfriend, and was just kind of bringing her down to the point where she didn't even bring him to the Oscars. She brought some other friends. And then she had a great story at the end of the night. She had won her Oscar and had to do a whole bunch of interviews. And by the time she got to the big after party, she saw that all these people were leaving. She thought the party was over and she missed her chance to celebrate. She walked into the party and a man in the corner stood up and beckoned her over, come sit with us. And she looked over and it was Cary Grant. So she sits down at his table and she finds herself sitting in between Cary Grant and Audrey Hepburn. And she said she turned into Gidget all over again and didn't know what to say or do. But so just her interview with her, that chapter is one of my favorites from start to finish.
Oh, definitely, definitely. Were you surprised by talking to people and talking with people like, oh, or well, yeah, like the Sally Field anecdote or stuff like that.
Sure. And there's a through line that people will notice when they read the book, which was a big eye opener to me, which was that for a lot of these people, as strange as this sounds, winning an Oscar was not entirely a positive experience. And for various reasons. I mean, I, as an lifelong Oscar fan, and even someone who has written about them and talked about them as a print and broadcast journalist, of course, you know that it's not going to be perfect. It's not going to be the Cinderella moment for everybody, but you're going to think that it's pretty much a positive thing. Well, for so many of these people, Mira Sorvino, who won an Oscar for a movie distributed by Harvey Weinstein, so that, is complex to say the least. Marlee Matlin, who was in a very tumultuous relationship with her co-star from Children of a Lesser God, William Hurt. She talks in great detail about, the trials that they were going through. Barry Jenkins, who directed Moonlight, who won for screenplay, and then his movie won Best Picture at the end of the night, only after another movie, La La Land, was mistakenly announced as the winner. He goes into great detail about, how that experience basically essentially ruined the win. And he says it wasn't an awesome night. And this is a guy whose movie had won Best Picture.
Yeah, yeah.
That to me was the eye opener, was for how many people this carries with it very complex emotions. And that's why I'm really glad that in the format of the book, I really stay out of the way. So my job as the writer of this book is to kick off every chapter with a little introduction and kind of set the stage and tell people what they need to know before they read the rest of the chapter, which is just first person of these people telling us what it was like to go through this whole process. And I think that hopefully adds to the intimacy of the whole thing.
Well, it tells, you tell at like the last part of each image where people display the Oscar. And that's so telling about the person. Nicole Kidman was like, oh, I don't have anybody to share with. I'll just share it with people or go to bed early. Olivia Colman, she was like, oh, I used to be cleaner and I used to tell speeches, practice my speech. Just very, very telling about the person, how they display it. Like Julie Roberts was, oh yeah, I left it in my sister's apartment. Everybody comes over, takes selfies with it. So I have an album of selfies with everybody having Oscars. It's just very telling about the person.
True. Yeah, and some people want to have fun with it. Emma Thompson keeps hers in her downstairs bathroom so that people go to the restroom and then they meet her Oscars. Halle Berry keeps hers in her bedroom because it's a very private thing for her. Some people who have kids, like Bobby Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, the husband and wife team who wrote "Let It Go," the song from Frozen, they felt weird about having their Oscars out, when in the room where, let's say, their kids are doing their homework. They didn't want to set expectations, like having these Oscars staring in the face of their kids. All these things that I didn't think about. Rita Moreno had her Oscar kept away in a cardboard box for years until her then new husband said, why is this being hidden away? You earned this. You should be displaying this. And she said, you know what, you're right. So she did. So I got every possible answer that I could have imagined for that really interesting question.
Yeah, then Steven Spielberg used it to start the Shoah Foundation. It's very telling about the people, about how they react and how they display to it, how they display it. Let's see. So how long did it take to write the book, fully write the book from beginning to end?
7 months.
Wow.
7 months from starting to reach out to people. So it was basically July of 2022 through January, February of 2023. So I finished the book about a year ago. And then from once the book was done, then we went through the process. I had a photo editor that I worked with to kind of go through all the archival photos, and we were given access to the Academy photo archives, which was great. And then we at TCM have a good photo archive that I was able to utilize as well. And then we licensed some pictures. But then it was the whole process of, copy editing and printing it and all that. And I got to see the finished copy back in October. But we decided to hold the book until January because we wanted it to come out when the Oscar nominations did.
Now, the Oscars, really big to me. I remember in 1980 when they used to still hold them at 10 p.m. Eastern time. I made a deal with my mom that I would go to bed early, get up, watch the show, and then go back to bed because I was just so much had so much interest in it. How did you discover it? What sparked your interest in it?
Yeah, I actually write about this a little bit in the introduction to the book. I somehow came across the Oscars in 1985. It was right before my 12th birthday. I don't know why. If somebody else in my house was watching it, or I just was flipping around and saw it, I don't know. But there's little snapshots of that 1985 ceremony that I remember. I remember Hein Esnor, the supporting actor, winning for The Killing Fields and thinking he just seemed like a really interesting guy. I remember the Harvey Milk documentary winning and thinking it was funny that there was a man whose name was Milk as an 11-year-old kid. Yeah. I just had these weird memories that kind of came back as I was putting this book together. But I also do remember at a young age being very taken by the ceremony of it and also the competition aspect of it. I found it exciting. And I think it was this interesting marriage of the winner and loser part of it, but also the fact that I was at that time in my life becoming a bit of a movie buff at 11 years old, thanks to some of the 80s films that people of my generation remember well, like, the John Hughes movies, for instance. So that was kind of the perfect storm. And then all throughout the rest of my high school and college days, I was always really interested in the Oscars. And as I mentioned, I started my career at Entertainment Weekly, and only about a year and a half after I started working there, I began writing about the Oscars in earnest and becoming kind of the Oscar expert at the magazine, which led to the stint as the Oscar expert on the Today Show, which has been now for 24 years. So I've always been intrigued by it. The movies that get nominated for the Oscars are the movies that I find myself interested in. I'm not a superhero guy. I'm not really an action movie guy as much. I like the movies that the Academy seems to like. So it all just seems to fit. And I'm also just in awe of great actors and great filmmakers. I just think it's amazing what they're able to do and make us feel. So I've enjoyed over these last almost 30 years of my journalism career talking to creative people. And this book feels like a great kind of culmination of these last 3 decades of, talking to people and trying to travel through this world with some, dignity and kindness. And also I turned 50, so I like the idea that it says 50.
Yeah, that's a nice bookmark, lack of a better phrase. Did your perspective on winning the Oscar change or stayed the same way after talking to everyone in the book?
It did change. It did change. And I mean, I'll say this. There's so much diversity in the stories, in the 50 stories, but the one thing that is the through line is the respect that all these people have for the tradition of the Oscars and the entity of it and the prestige. Whether they grew up watching the Oscars or in the case of Jennifer Hudson, really didn't know what they were until she had made the movie Dreamgirls. Now there's so much respect for the Oscars. But going back to what I just said about how so many of the people I interviewed were telling me about rough experiences that they were going through. So now, and still as part of my job, I'm interviewing Oscar nominees. I was just interviewing a whole bunch of Oscar nominees at the nominees luncheon for Turner Classic Movies last week. I'm now even more aware and cognizant of the fact that, yeah, even though they're getting all this attention and acclaim, they also might be going through things in their lives. So it helps me remember to be kind and gentle to people, even when they're going through, something that seems as exciting as this. You never know what's actually going on in their lives.
Yeah, to not take things personally. That's always a good, or at least for me, that's always a good thing to keep that in mind. Now you're taking the you took over the duties that Army Archer used to do on the red carpet. Is that still the case?
No, it's not. I did that for 2 years, and then unfortunately I took a job at NBC, and it's an ABC show. So once I took the job at NBC, I was no longer allowed to be the greeter anymore. But I did do it for 2 years. I was very, very honored to be the third person ever asked to do that. Army Archer was the first. Robert Osborne, the original Turner Classic Movies host, was the second, and then I succeeded him. But that was something that I will always be very happy that I got to do for a couple of years. And for people who don't know what that is, the Academy official red carpet greeter is the person who is on the red carpet with a microphone and a PA system, who greets all of the nominees and guests as they come onto the red carpet and does quick interviews with them that are then played over the loudspeaker for all the fans who are in the bleachers. And it was so much fun. It was a lot of work because you're not just interviewing George Clooney, you're also interviewing the producer of the Greek nominee for Best Foreign Language Film. You had to be knowledgeable about every single nominee in every single category. But one thing I remember about it was how much fun it was to have the microphone live. So I could shame anyone into coming and talking to me. So I saw Sandra Bullock coming down the carpet, and I would say, "Oh, look, ladies and gentlemen, it's Sandra Bullock. Don't you want her to come talk to me?" And then everybody would scream, and she had no choice but to come and do an interview with me. So I had the power that night.
Yeah, that's very enticing. That's very attractive. Now, speaking of the Academy Awards and your expertise, what do you think will win?
Oppenheimer. Oppenheimer is going to sweep, much in the way that Everything Everywhere All at Once did last year. I think the question is, how many Oscars will Oppenheimer win? I'm thinking it's going to be around 7 or 8, because it'll win for Best Picture and Best Director and Best Supporting Actor, cinematography, score, editing, maybe sound. It has a chance for Best Actor as well, although I do think Paul Giamatti will win for the holdovers for Best Actor. But that's why I think it'll be somewhere in that 7 to 8 overall range.
Oh, yeah, well, I'm surprised. I thought, well, it's a tight race between Cillian Murphy and Paul Giamatti. So you think Paul Giamatti will take it?
I do. I could be wrong, because we just saw Cillian Murphy win the BAFTA the other night, and there is significant overlap between the voters of that award and the Oscars. The SAG Awards, of course, are coming up this weekend, so I'm very curious to see what happens there. If Cillian Murphy were to win the SAG Award, I would probably change my prediction, but right now I'm sticking.
Oh yeah, because that's the largest voting body in the Academy, the actors.
Yes.
So what's your take on overall on this year's nominations? You said you liked all the movies.
I really do. I mean, yeah, I'm a huge fan of the movie Anatomy of a Fall, which was nominated for Best Picture, Director, Actress, Screenplay. I love that film, European film. It's in English, German, and French. I just adore it. My second favorite movie of the year was All of Us Strangers, which was a movie that got some acclaim but didn't get any Oscar nominations. That's my one quibble with the nominations this year. But if you look at that list of 10, it's so interesting because you have the mega blockbusters of Oppenheimer and Barbie. You have the kind of mid-range movies like Poor Things or American Fiction. And then you have these two great foreign language films, Zone of Interest and Anatomy of a Fall. And then also Past Lives, which is kind of a quasi foreign language film. So I love the list of 10. I'm not the biggest fan of the 10 Best Picture nominees concept in general. I wish it was back to 5, which is how I remember it being, even though, of course, the Oscars started out with 10 back in the late 1920s. Yeah. But I think if you're going to have 10, you might as well have a great list of 10 like we do this year.
Okay. All right. What's your thought on why Margot Robbie and Greta Gerwig weren't nominated for Barbie?
Well, shockingly, I've been asked this already, so I have an answer.
I know. I thought.
That is the one thing everybody wants to know, which is great because it proves that the Oscars are still relevant, by the way, because people love to say the Oscars are irrelevant. Well, look at all the news that was made when those two didn't get nominated in those marquee categories. First of all, it's important to remember that Greta Gerwig and Margot Robbie were both nominated this year for Barbie, just not in those big categories. But to answer your question, as people may be aware, I'm sure a lot of people watching this are, when the voters vote, they rank their choices. Number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for Best Actress, for instance. And in order to get nominated, you have to I'm going to simplify here. You have to have a small-ish but decent size passionate following who's putting you number one or number two in their ballots. So I think it's probably feasible that Margot Robbie was on more ballots than, let's say, Sandra Hüller, the star of Anatomy of a Fall. But the people who voted for Sandra Hüller had her number one or number two in their ballot, and they probably had Margot Robbie like at 3 or 4. I don't think there's as many people who put Margot Robbie number one on their Best Actress list.
Okay.
So that's what happened. You have to have the number 1 and 2 votes to get the slot. You can't be everyone's number 5 choice.
Yeah, because 1 and 2 get the most points, and
It's not
therefore
even points. It's so complicated. Like each person's ballot only gets counted for one person. So if I voted for, let's say Greta Lee as number 1, and I voted for Sandra Hüller as number 2, and Greta Lee didn't have enough to get in, then they recount my second choice. And if my second choice was Sandra Hüller, that's the person that my ballot counts as. So each person's ballot, only one name gets to count. So it's not like you get 5 points for voting Sandra Hüller, 4 points for Greta Lee, 3, 2, so on. Your ballot in each category only counts for one person, depending on how it all shakes down. So I think that, again, a lot of people had Margot Robbie on their ballots, but probably as number 4 or 5, and they never got down that far.
Holy cow, that sounds so complicated.
It is, but I love it. I like the math of it. I think it's really interesting.
But now, do you plan to have a sequel to the book, perhaps?
That's a great question. I am happy to say that my publisher is pleased enough with the way this is selling that they want me to write a second book. I'm trying to figure out now. First of all, I'm just having a great time on this book tour and talking to people about this. Right now, that's my focus. But after the Oscars, maybe in the spring, when this kind of quiets down, I'm going to start thinking about what a second book could look like. My first choice right now would be to do something like 50 more Oscar nights or another 50 Oscar nights or something, because there's so many great people that I didn't get to in this book that I know have terrific stories. I'm also thinking in the back of my mind, in case the publisher doesn't seem interested in that, about some other ideas of film related or music related things that I could write about.
Okay. All right. And then in a local article you talked with in Detroit Free Press, you talked about speeches, actors' speeches, and how, like with Jane Fonda, how any speeches from your memory stand out as to how memorable they are, how interesting they were?
Sure. I mean, my favorite Oscar speech of all time was Halle Berry, who I'm happy to say is in the book, when she won Best Actress for Monsters Ball and became the first Black performer ever to win in that category. If you go on YouTube and watch it, it's such a magical, powerful moment, because it wasn't a sure thing that she was going to win. Sissy Spacek had won the Golden Globe, so she wasn't sure if she was going to win. She kind of went in accepting the fact that she wouldn't, and then she did, and she was so overtaken with emotion. She took a while to compose herself, but once she did, she gave a really beautiful speech that ended up rambling a little bit, and she kind of chastises herself in our interview for thanking the same person twice and things like that. But up until that moment, it was a very powerful speech that she did without a paper in her hand, because I hate when people go up with a piece of paper in their hand. These are actors. They should be able to memorize something. And she gave a speech that was really from the heart and spoke about the importance of it and the moment of it. And so I think that's the beauty of the Oscars. Another favorite speech of mine is the actor J.K. Simmons, who I understand is local.
From Detroit, yeah.
Right. And his speech was so great because he had lost his mom and dad in the year and a half leading up to the Oscars. And as people know, he implored us all to call our mom, call our dad, and don't text them, don't email them, pick up the phone and call them. And he tells me in the book, because he's in there, about how he found out about all these people, family members who were estranged from their parents or their kids, who then picked up the phone and called someone, and how he had his speech, unknowingly to him, had this, great impact on so many people around the world.
Cool. So, well, as your work with Turner Classic Movies is your primary job, got to ask you about it. It's the 30th anniversary of the channel. What kinds of plans do you have in store there?
A lot. So April 14th is the 30th anniversary of TCM, and we have so many great things planned. One thing that we're doing on the actual anniversary day, the 14th, we are doing a full day tribute to our original host, Robert Osborne, who passed away in 2017, but is still such a guiding force to all of us. And there's going to be a whole day of programming that includes him. So for instance, I actually got to co-host with him 17 years ago when I was a young writer at Entertainment Weekly, focusing on the Oscars. He and I did a bunch of introductions together for some Best Picture winners. So we're going to run one of those from 17 years ago. I look like a little child. And we're going to introduce An American in Paris together. And then the other great thing that we've done is we have brought back 12 people who worked at TCM at the very beginning, and they're going to come on with us hosts and tell stories about how the channel was developed and founded and launched, and really hear their interesting stories about the early days of TCM 30 years ago, and what a special place it was back then, and hopefully still is today.
Yeah, there's concerns. So it's going despite what the stories that it was cut, or
Yes, there were layoffs that were very public, and which is horrible and very sad for us. We miss the people who aren't there anymore. If there's a silver lining, it's that we had some people like Steven Spielberg and Martin Scorsese and Paul Thomas Anderson kind of come to our defense as a channel, and now have signed on as advisors. So you see them on the channel with some frequency, and they're also behind the scenes coming up with some interesting ideas of programming. But the five of us that are hosts on the channel, we are going nowhere. Our hope is that the viewers of the channel will not be able to see or notice some of the changes that have been going on behind the scenes. Our job is to kind of create a continuity for our fans and our viewers.
okay. Well, good, because I'm a fan, and I know other people out there are big fans too. So great. Well, we'll start our Q&A session right now. Let's see what's online, questions from the online audience here. Question about the the Academy Museum in Los Angeles. Could you just an overall, how is it? Is it fabulous? What were your impressions of it? Because I know you did a signing there recently.
I did. Now, full disclosure, I'm a little biased because one of the other hosts on TCM is Jacqueline Stewart, who is the president of the Academy Museum. So I've gotten to tour it a couple of times. As a movie fan, I love it. And what's great about it is that they have exhibits that are always there, and they have screens with some of the best ever Oscar speeches of all time. There's a room with a whole bunch of notable Academy Awards. Barry Jenkins' Oscar is in there. And then they have rotating exhibitions as well. There's one that's up now about John Waters called Pope of Trash, which is so fun. And if you're a fan of John Waters, that's a must, because a lot of the costumes and stuff from his films are there. But they also have great screenings all the time. And then as you just mentioned, I did a book launch event there with my childhood friend Topher Grace, and he interviewed me in front of an audience, and I did do a signing there, and they sell my book in the gift store, which is very exciting.
Oh, I bet. Anybody have a question? Yeah, hi.
I'm hoping he recognizes my voice.
Hi.
Dave and I have known each other a long time. I'm wondering, I know, Dave, you've been a movie buff for your entire life. Is there anyone that you interviewed for the book that you had always wanted to interview and never had?
Ooh, good question. Well, first of all, I'll tell a funny story about Christy. So Christy and I went to Duke University together, and I was already at that point obsessed with movies, and one of my favorite movies was Children of a Lesser God, and about which I interviewed Marlee Matlin in the book. And the joke amongst our circle of friends was that I had Children of a Lesser God taped off the TV on like a VHS tape, because I recorded it off HBO because I loved it so much. And all I wanted people to do was to watch this movie with me. And I would always ask people, come just watch this movie, and nobody ever wanted to do it. So now when I get to program my own nights on TCM, I always choose Children of a Lesser God, and I make the world at large watch the movie with me. But that's a good question. So out of the 50 people in the book, there were 15 that I had never interviewed before. So I'm happy to say that 35 of them I already knew, but I had never interviewed Rita Moreno, And so for me to interview someone like her who won an Oscar 60 years ago, that was a thrill. And Lee Grant, I didn't know. Mel Brooks, I had never interviewed. And then more recent winners, I'm a big John Legend fan. I like his music. I love the TV show The Voice. I've never missed an episode ever. So I was very excited that he agreed to be in the book. That was really a thrill.
Cool. Is there?
The Jean Herschel Award for Humanitarian. What did he do that they named it after him?
Yeah, did you hear about the Jean Herschel? Why?
Yeah.
The name?
I actually don't know. Does the gentleman know the answer?
Do you know? Or you're asking?
I'm asking.
Yeah, he doesn't.
No.
He doesn't know.
I'm afraid I do not know the answer to that, but that's something I should know. So I'm going to Google it. And
Yeah.
we're going to find out.
The only two awards that I'm familiar with from the Oscars are the Herschel Award for Humanitarian and the Irving Thalberg Award.
Well, he was the head of production at MGM.
Yeah, in the 1930s, he worked with Marx Brothers, Gone with the Wind. So I'm going
I
to.
was just curious as to why Herschel was picked for that.
It's a great question. We're going to get to the bottom of it together.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Let's see.
Jean Herschel was an actor, a Danish actor. So we can only assume that he was obviously he was an actor and philanthropist. So here, this is explaining it. So he obviously was.
Okay.
I wondered why they named him, for that award.
Must have been in his philanthropy.
The president of the Motion Picture Relief Fund for 18 years.
There you go.
Working with the Relief Fund for many, many years. So perhaps that's, and that goes with it since it's humanitarian work, that just stuck. So,
Irving, there's a biography of Irving Thalberg, and it explains how he was named for that award.
but I don't know of one for Mr. Herschel.
That's
Yeah.
No, he's right. There is the Jean Herschel Humanitarian Oscar, and that's the one that Steven Spielberg won before he ever won an Oscar. And when you win the Herschel Prize, you don't actually get an Oscar statue. You get more of like a plaque. But that is a special award that they don't give out every year at the Governor's Awards, but every few years they do give out this humanitarian award. It's the one that Jeffrey Katzenberg won a few years ago. So the Jean Herschel Award exists. It's just not an annual award. It's every few years they decide to give that one out.
Okay, actually in the Q&A, it's Jean Herschel is Danish actor and translator who's one of Hollywood's most active philanthropists. So there you go. And let's see, let's look in.
anyway.
Let's see. Did you get a chance question from Q&A? Did you get a chance to interview a lot of the composers, the music composers, say like John Williams, Alan Menken, stuff like that, people like
Yes.
that?
Alan Menken is in the book. He is the most Oscar awarded person alive. He has 8 Oscars. No one alive has more. I interviewed Glenn Hansard and Marketa Irglova, who were the stars and composers from the movie Once. I interviewed Bobby Lopez and Kristen Anderson Lopez, who won an Oscar for writing Let It Go from Frozen. And then I have some other best song winners in there, like Elton John and John Legend and Keith Carradine and Melissa Etheridge.
Okay, let's go Q&A. There was one question. If you could interview somebody from the 1929 ceremony, some actor or actress or winner from that, who do you think that would
Maybe Emil Jannings, who was the first ever Best Actor winner because he was the first person, that was the first award that they gave out. I think they had to give his first, I don't know if he had somewhere to go or something. So he is the first person to have ever been awarded physically an Oscar. So I think that's kind of interesting. And then from 10 years later, I would have wanted to interview Hattie McDaniel, because the famous story about her is that she had to sit, off to the side of the ballroom because it was a whites only ambassador hotel. And then she won and just gave a beautiful speech. And I would just love to have heard her firsthand story of what that whole experience was like.
Now, I was reading Whoopi Goldberg's entry, and she was talking about how if you pick it up, you have to give a speech. Otherwise, because the mythology is that you would win one. Is that the case?
I didn't buy that story. I loved it. That's why I put it in the book. But it was interesting to hear people's superstitions. So Whoopi's superstition is that if you hold one and give a speech, you'll win one day. And then Steven Spielberg on the other side of the coin, even though his movies always won Oscars, his movies won 14 Oscars before he ever won an Oscar. And he would go to his friends' houses and they had Oscars, like Julia Phillips, the producer of The Sting, and they would say, "Do you want to hold our Oscar?" And he would always say, "No, I don't want to hold an Oscar until I've won one." So even though he had already won the Jean Herschel Humanitarian Award when he was nominated for Schindler's List, he had never held an official Oscar statue because he was given more of a plaque when he won the honorary award.
Okay, let's go back one more from the online Q&A. Let's take a look here. Let's go down here. Okay, well, I think that's it for questions, but I want to say thank you very much, Dave, for joining us tonight. One more? Okay.
Are you gonna write a book for the 100th anniversary of the Oscars in 2028?
What a great idea. Who's going to hire me to do that? Let's find someone to hire me. Maybe I'll reach out to the Academy and say, who's writing your 100th anniversary book? Well, because Robert Osborne,
I was going to say, we have that.
we have it. So, but it needs to be updated for the 100th anniversary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And so, yeah.
I got a question. You talked about how the nominations happen for the individuals to be nominated. How is the voting for the winners? How do you become a winner? What's the voting behind that?
So once the nominations are announced, then every member of the Academy gets to vote on each category. So for the nominations, only actors vote for nominating actors, only editors vote for nominating best editing. But once the nominations are released, if I'm a voter of the Academy, I now get to vote on every category. And when my ballot comes with the 5 nominees, or in the case of Best Picture, 10, I just check off 1. And it's simple math, who gets the most.
Wow.
So it's not as complicated, except for Best Picture. Now in Best Picture, they ask you to rank. So, and then it's a whole other thing too.
Like I described before.
Yeah, but it's a little bit easier in the other categories.
So, oh, wow. Well, thank you very much. It's always great for me, at least, and others to talk about the Oscars. It's a great book. I encourage everybody to pick up a copy, especially at the Page's Bookshop here in Detroit. And thanks a lot, Dave, for joining us. And have a good ceremony.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. It's great to be with you.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
I'm still here.
okay.
This is the first book that I've seen that TMC has done. Is there other books through the years that I missed? 'Cause
Yes.
I over.
Yes. So TCM has put out, I would say, 20 or 30 books at this point.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And that's okay. And there's books that we've done. This is my first personally, but Eddie Muller, who is my fellow TCM host, has written books about film noir. We have books called The Essentials, which is a feature that we do on the network where people have written about like the most classic films ever. There's a book about the best classic horror films, the best classic musicals, the best summer movies. There's more books than you can imagine. If you were to search online TCM books or Turner Classic Movies books, you would find all of them. There's books about Natalie Wood, about Sophia Loren, about West Side Story, the making of that one movie. So some are very specific in focus, and then others are more kind of wide ranging in focus. But there's a ton of great stuff to discover.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. All set? Well, thank you very much, Dave. Have a good night.
Have a great day.